Halo, halo Pak Yuda.
Tumben beredar.
Siapa
Beredar
nih?
terus.
Kelihatan ketemu
Nynke.
kawan kali ya.
Yang
Ah,
beredar
baru
Pak
kelihatan.
Yuda.
Kita mah terang benderang tuh langit biru, Bo. Gua neke tuh ketutupan awan melulu. Sampai nggak kelihatan. Baru kali ini nih terang benderang blue sky nih. Luar biasa. Cewek semua ya pesertanya. Luar biasa nih. Saya minoritas nih.
Wah, Pak Yuda harusnya bawa pasukan, Pak.
Aduh, nggak punya pasukan. Saya samurai, bawa sendirian.
Oh gitu.
Jadi Ronin nih, Ronin. Ronin
Ronin
untuk
kalau sendirian, kalau samurai rame.
Iya, Ronin cari cari majikan udah ganti pada pakai bedil, samurai nggak kepake, Bo. Aneh coba
Nah,
modal
oke,
pensil. Oh,
Baik.
udah mulai ya?
udah. Oke, baik Pak, saya izin mulai ya Pak.
Oh iya, iya, iya. Sorry nih ngobrol
Oke,
ngalor
oh nggak
ngidul.
apa-apa, it's okay Pak. Nah, oke, selamat sore semuanya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy to see you again in Obrolan Heritage or Heritage Talk, 94 edition. And topic of today's discussion is a space of reflection, unraveling colonial histories, and allowing space for peaceful dialogue. Nah, and today's presentation will be presented by Nynke Stam, a graduate from Delft University. Okay, so before we start our event today, let me introduce you about this event. So, Obrolan Heritage or Heritage Talk was first launched on February 24 in 2016 and as an informal forum initiated jointly by the Architecture Documentation Center or PDA, Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur Indonesia, and the Indonesian Architects Association or IAI. And start from pandemic in May 2020, from 39 edition, the Obrolan Heritage partnered with the Department of Architecture at the Faculty of Civil Engineering and Planning, Trisakti University, to shift into an online webinar format in order to reach a wider audience. So to this day, Obrolan Heritage continues to be held in online format, so allowing participants from diverse locations to join. And I will read the rules for this today's event. Dan jadi peraturan Obrolan Heritage hari ini adalah the first one, please make sure that you enter this room from the attached link in email that you have got from official account of IAI. Jadi pastikan Anda join di Zoom ini melalui email yang sudah terdaftar, yang sudah kami kirimkan lewat email Anda dari IAI secara resmi. And okay, the next. And we will set the participant microphone into mute mode. So if there's question regarding to the presentation, you can set it through Zoom chat or YouTube chat, and the moderator will read it to our speaker. And next, discussion based on the question and the presentation will be held in Zoom meeting room and will be led by our moderator. And the last one, by the end of the session, we will take some picture for documentation. So please, we kindly ask you participants to please turn on your cameras. Now, before we start into the main presentation, we will have an opening speech from Assessment and Conservation Board from IAI National dari Ibu Ratu. Silakan Ibu untuk memberikan opening speech. And the time is yours.
Terima kasih. Selamat sore. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. I'm here speak as a representative of Assessment and Conservation Board member from Ikatan Arsitek Indonesia or Arsitek Association in Indonesia. I'm very happy and welcoming all the presenter and guests to enjoy this afternoon topic. As many of us know, our cultural heritage is partly linked to a long-standing colonial history of our country, and part of the history are the architecture as the evidence. And through the discussion in this afternoon, I hope we can have more open and open understanding about what happened to heritage in our country, and mostly it can it can open more room for dialogue, and hopefully can tuh saya bingung kalau mau pakai bahasa. Hopefully it can open more space for further research, so we can enrich our understanding and experience related to our heritage. I think that's from me, and I return to Miss Bintan.
Okay, thank you, Bu, for the opening speech. Okay, before we start into the main event, I want to remind you, the participant, that your attendance already recorded automatically by our system, so you don't need to feel anything about the presentation. So, yeah, okay, next. Now, before we start, I want to introduce you into our very, very special speaker today. She's Nynke Stam, 20 years old and recently graduated from the Architecture of Delft University of Technology in Netherlands. And despite her background in architecture, she is eager to work on social, cultural, and political topics in our society and public spaces, using a multidisciplinary approach with her freelance practice studioist. Oh, she's so cool. And she considers herself as a social entrepreneur, designer, storyteller, and connector. And today's discussion will be led by our very special moderator, Ibu Anneke. Now, she's an architect graduated from ITB, who has been deepened her expertise in conservation and adaptive reuse for almost 30 years. As an expert in heritage conservation, Ibu Anneke had experiences amongst the other as project manager for Kota Tua Jakarta's revitalization, including Museum Sejarah Jakarta. And for the past several years, Ibu Anneke has been hired as project management works for several heritage buildings in Jakarta and surrounding areas. And through National Professional Organization, IAI, Ikatan Arsitek Indonesia, as Assessment and Conservation Board member from 2024 until 2027. And also through Heritage Community Bandung Heritage Society, she suggests many programs and collaboration plans with and for fellow architects and other heritage experts of other profession in other province and possibly other countries. Wow, such a very cool record. So yeah, I will from this time, Ibu Anneke will be lead the discussion. So the time is yours, Ibu Anneke.
Alright, terima kasih Bintan. Okay, good afternoon everybody who already joined. Good morning to Nynke Stam. Yes, true, right? You are in Rotterdam.
Yes.
Good morning for people not in Jakarta. In Jakarta, it's now 3 p.m. in the afternoon. I hope this discussion, your presentation will lead us to further discussion more than only architecture, because I already read your resume a little bit, but I'm really exciting to wait for your next. Okay, for Nynke Stam, if you are ready, you could already share your screen and
Yes.
start your presentation.
Let's see.
Can everybody see my screen?
Not
It's
yet.
still loading. Yeah.
Still loading. If you have terms in Bahasa Indonesia, please do mention it in Bahasa, because I knew you visit Jakarta last year, right?
I did.
Okay,
I'll
please
try.
start.
Well, thank you very much for having me. First of all, I'm very honored that I can share my project with all of you. Yeah, especially because, as Anneke already said, my project, I think, goes beyond architecture, and I hope it opens this dialogue and more broader discussion about colonialism and cultural heritage and how to deal with it. Yeah, and how to have this peaceful dialogue about it. So despite the fact that my design is located in the Netherlands, I think there are still very interesting findings or ideas that might also inspire you or let you think about how to deal with colonial heritage in Indonesia itself. So yeah, as I was already introduced, my name is Nynke Stam. I'm 25 years old and I recently graduated from the Master of Architecture at Delft University of Technology, with my project, A Space of Reflection, Unraveling Colonial Histories and Allowing Space for Peaceful Dialogue. So first I would quickly want to give a small context and starting point for the reason why I made up this topic for my graduation project, because I came up with it completely by myself. Then I want to give some socio-historical context, because in the Netherlands, the socio-historical context is a bit different than in Indonesia regarding this topic. And then I'll dive into the project itself, and then a short follow-up on what happened after this graduation project. So first, context and starting point. This is a very rough map of the world, and we can see in this center blue square this tiny dot that is the Netherlands. It's a very small country, but all these white dots on the map used to be former Dutch colonies, with Indonesia being the biggest one. But when I went to school in history class, all I learned about was the Dutch Golden Age. So in the 17th century, during this colonial era, I learned about flourishing art and that we became wealthy and that science wasn't like the knowledge was increasing of science. And these are still the narratives and the traces that we see in our public spaces. We have statues of J.P. Koen, of commanders who did horrible things as well. We have massive monuments of former headquarters of VOC. That is what we celebrate in our public domain. That is what the narrative that is being represented. But I concluded that history is not black and white, because history knows more perspectives to it. There's more nuance, and there's multiple people and community involved in historical events. And all these communities perceive this history differently. There's all different narratives. And I think a good example to show this, you might know this painting. It's about the Java War. It's called The Submission of Prince Diponegoro to General de Kock. It is made by a Dutch painter, Nicolaas Pieneman, in 1830. But there's another painting that was made by an Indonesian painter. It was 27 years later, The Arrest of Pangeran Diponegoro, made by Raden Saleh. And the interesting thing is that there's two paintings that are different from each other, but they are capturing the exact same historical event. So we can see differences. On the left, there's this symbol of nationalism with the Dutch flag. There's more details in the architecture. We have the governors that are a few steps above the prince on the staircase, and that really show their power. While on the right painting, all these commanders have heads that are too big for their small, tiny bodies, implying that they are big heads or arrogant people. And so I started to realize that also for the shared history between Indonesia and the Netherlands, that has to do with so many centuries of different events that happened, but also many different communities that were involved in it. So Dutch Indies people, Indo-European, Indo-African, etc., etc. So it kind of stuck to me, like, how is it that history is not black and white, and we have all these different communities and different narratives related to history, but in our public space, there's only one narrative that is being represented, a very one-sided and very whitewashed narrative about this golden age. And so 2 years ago, in my first year of my master's, I started to do some research on this, colonial slavery memorials for the future. So I dove into some memorials and monuments that we have in Dutch public spaces regarding our colonial past. And I did this mapping exercise, and I did this mapping exercise 2 years ago. So some tiny things have changed, but in general, there's a very great disbalance between the narratives that are being represented. So the green dots are more the narratives like the J.P. Koen statues or the former headquarters of the VOC or street names that refer to our former colonies. And then there's, in total, in 2023, there were about 5 or 6 monuments or memorials or places in our public domain that refer to the darker side of this history, the slavery that occurred or the other stuff. So there's this great disbalance, and I felt like I wanted to do something about it. And I studied this monument in Amsterdam. It is called Monument Indië Nederland, which means the Indisch Dutch monument. And I was very interested by it because, well, on this picture, you can see how this memorial site is being used by society as just a pleasant space for leisure. So it's interesting to think of, as a designer, when you design a memorial space, that it also has, to some degree, some spatial quality that people are going to use for its spatial quality, not necessarily just for the symbolical meaning of the memorial. But it's also interesting that this memorial used to be a monument for Van Heuts. And Van Heuts was a former governor who was a leading governor in the Aceh War. So he committed horrible crimes in Aceh. And we decided to celebrate him with a monument in the Netherlands. So that was a bit, that is how it went in that time. But it's interesting because there's always also this dialogue between the memorial object in the public space and how society perceives it and deals with it. So there has been a lot of claddings and bombings of the memorial because society didn't agree with the message of Van Heuts being celebrated there. And also over time, the memorial has changed in certain ways. So it used to be the Van Heuts monument. Now it is the Dutch Indies monument. And now it's celebrating not Van Heuts, but it's celebrating the relationship between the Netherlands and Indonesia. And they had these columns that were added over time. So it's very interesting to see, because usually memorials are very static objects, but we shouldn't forget that society is incredibly dynamic, and society evolves and changes over time in terms of historical perception and how we perceive things. So it's a weird contrast actually in memorial architecture, how we have these static objects but a dynamic society. So those were the main conclusions that I drew. So first of all, that there's just this very one-sided narrative on Dutch colonial history, and it should be expanded with other narratives. But also that I was wondering whether memorials perhaps shouldn't be static, but rather objects that could be changeable or flexible over time. And so that was the starting point of my graduation project. I wanted to design some type of memorial for the shared history between Indonesia and the Netherlands. So for a small social historical context over here, because I noticed when I was in Indonesia, there was a bit different there. In the Netherlands, in Dutch society, the shared history between Indonesia and the Netherlands is very, very sensitive. It's a very tricky topic. I remember when I told people that I was going to do something with it for my graduation project, many people were like, "Ooh, are you sure? I'm not sure if you should touch upon that topic. It's a bit tricky. It's very sensitive. You're going to hurt people or communities." So it's a very high barrier to even address the topic and work with it, which is, I think, a bit different in Indonesia, at least what I experienced. But this socio-historical context actually also starts with a very personal context, because my own grandmother, who unfortunately passed away 6 years ago, she was born and raised in the Dutch East Indies. She had 2 Dutch parents, and together with many other Dutch people, her parents went to the Dutch East Indies colony in the beginning of the 1900s. So my grandmother was born there, she was raised there. She had, a pretty carefree childhood, I would imagine. But everything changed when the Japanese invaded and World War II started, because Dutch Indies people like my grandmother and also Indo-Europeans were captured in internment camps all over the country. And in these camps, they have experienced hunger and many other traumatic experiences. And when the Japanese left, when World War II was over, it still wasn't over for these people. They had to remain inside the camp walls because outside the camp, there was the Indonesian independence war starting. And the Indonesians didn't want to do anything with the Dutch or Dutch Indies people because they had been colonized for so long. So it wasn't safe for Dutch Indies people outside the camp walls. So together with many, many other people and also other communities, also Moluccans and Indo-Africans, many people took the boat to the Netherlands to start their new life. But that was also a bit complicated because people were supposedly to go home to their mother country of the Netherlands, but 80% of the people that were on this boat had never even been to the Netherlands. They didn't know what the Netherlands was. They didn't know how that society worked. And their own country, from which they identified themselves, wasn't existing anymore. The Dutch East Indies was no longer there. It was now Indonesia. It was a new country. So that's very complicated. And also, in the generations of my grandmother, throughout the different communities, so the Dutch Indies people, but also Indo-Africans and Indo-Europeans, there is this thing called Indies silence. And it actually means that when all these people arrived on the boat in Dutch society, they were all silenced. There was no room for their stories, for their traumas in the camps, for what they've experienced during the independence war, what their life was like in the Dutch East Indies. They were just put outside of society, especially the Indo-Europeans and Indo-Africans and Moluccans, because they had a non-white skin color. So they were not part of Dutch society, but they were also not welcome back in Indonesia. So it was a very complex situation, but they were all silenced. There was no room for their stories and their narratives. And so my grandmother, I hardly know anything about her childhood. I know nothing about what she's experienced in these traumatic internment camps. I don't know about her childhood in the Dutch East Indies. She never spoke about it. She was always silent, so she never felt the room that she could share the stories. And so the only thing we have is a couple of objects. So I have a jewelry box of her, and my grandmother happened to paint a bit. And these are just a few objects that kind of give a little grip on what her story might have been or what she might have experienced, but we're not too sure. And it's just, it was a realization when she passed away, unfortunately, that many people of this generation are passing now. And with them, their stories are also dying. And I think that it's a waste to forget about these stories, and that we should now take action to actually give room to these stories and listen to them and get a better understanding of it all. So that's actually the mission that I started for my graduation project, with a clear realization that the story of my grandmother isn't the only narrative. So as I said before, there's also the Indo-Europeans, the Indo-Africans, the Moluccans, and these are all communities that are still visible in Dutch society nowadays in large numbers. There's millions and millions of people that have a link to these communities or this history specifically. But when I was doing this research and spoke to all these communities, I also realized that there was this entire community of the native people and the current Indonesians that I could never find out about when being in the Netherlands. So that's why last year I decided to visit Indonesia. And I only went to Java. I visited the 5 big cities of Jakarta, Semarang, Surabaya, Yogyakarta, and Bandung. And I am well aware of the limitations of this research because Indonesia is way more than just Java and way more than just these 5 cities. I'm well aware, but also my time was limited. But I felt like I just needed to go there and get a better understanding and a better grip on the Indonesian perspective and the narrative that is alive in Indonesian society, and how they in the public space refer to this colonial era and how you think of it. So that's why I went down there, and I had a few conclusions when I went there. First of all, I was amazed in all those 5 cities. You have these, Kota Tua, Kota Lamas, so the older towns where it just felt so Dutch to me, the architecture that I saw. The only difference is that a lot of the architecture is white, and in the Netherlands we don't have a lot of white facades. But other than that, like the architecture, the forms, the ratios, it was so Dutch to me. So that was crazy because I've never learned about this in my architecture entire period of architecture school, I've never, ever learned about the architecture that we had left in our overseas colonies. So that was interesting to experience. But I also found it interesting what the Indonesian attitude was towards these buildings, because everybody was a big fan of these buildings, and they were so pretty and they work well in technical aspects. And I also noticed that there are some, especially in cafes, restaurants, but also some museums, I found some colonial interiors, and I was very intrigued by it, because in the Netherlands, because the topic is so sensitive, you would never be able to create a restaurant or a cafe with this kind of colonial interior or furniture that we used in that time, because it's so sensitive. And here in Indonesia, I felt sometimes like people are just okay with it, and it is celebrated, or it is sometimes romanticized. That's the idea that I got sometimes, or when I spoke to people. And that was just very interesting to me. And also I looked a lot into the monuments and the memorials that you have in your public space. And the thing that I noticed most in all these cities is the size of the monuments, because they are enormous, I must say. And I just noticed that a lot of these monuments or memorials seem to have a very imposing message, a very heroic message, like we defeated the colonizers and now we're gonna move forward, which was very interesting. But also the size is just very impactful. For example, Monument Nacional, it's such a enormous object stating this is the message. And I feel like it obviously has to do also with the fact that Sukarno had a background in civil engineering and architecture. So he was well aware of what he was doing and the narrative that he was creating in the public space. And then there was this one sentence that I also learned about when I was in Indonesia. I'm going to try and pronounce it, but Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity.
Tunggal Ika.
Okay.
Bhinneka Tunggal Ika.
Bhinneka Tunggal Ika.
Yes.
But it was a very inspiring sentence that I learned about in Indonesia, because the colonizers had this mindset of we have to divide and conquer the different areas and the different islands. But the Indonesians decided, despite having so many islands and different communities and different cultures and different backgrounds, to collaborate, to unite and defeat the colonizer in that way. And when I was thinking of this sentence, I was in Indonesia, and I was wondering, okay, I've been diving into this very specific history, like the shared history between Indonesia and the Netherlands. But actually, this history is not just on itself. This history also has to do with the other aspects of Dutch colonial history, because there is links between Africa and the Dutch East Indies, but also a link to Suriname, and also just in general how the Dutch decided to go through this period of colonization and slavery and exploitation of people. And that's actually when I started thinking, maybe I shouldn't divide and conquer, and shouldn't say we have the East and we have the West. I'm only going to focus on the East. But maybe I should unite these histories with each other also in my project. So that's actually how I expanded the idea of my project. Most of my research was done on the shared history between Indonesia and the Netherlands specifically, but eventually I concluded that my design should also be for Dutch colonial history in general, also for the other areas like Suriname and Curaçao. Because all these narratives are currently existing in Dutch society and all over the world. There's millions and millions and millions of people that have a direct link to Dutch colonial history, yet most of these narratives are not being heard, they are silenced, they are not acknowledged, or many people just don't know about it. So we're now going to go into my project, A Space of Reflection, which is located in the city of The Hague in the Netherlands. And it is located in The Hague because this is where our government is located. So it's the heart of our democracy. We have the International Peace Palace over here, so it's the City of Justice. And we have many royal palaces here as well. But also it is the city that houses the largest amount of descendants of the shared history between Indonesia and the Netherlands. So many people from these communities can be found in The Hague. And I zoomed in to the central area of the city. And I found that these are just a few examples of colonial traces that we have in our public space in The Hague. So for example, we have the Indies Monument, and you might think, hey, why are you designing another monument? Because this is about the Dutch East Indies. But this specific monument is actually only established for the victims that fell during World War II in the Dutch East Indies in the internment camps. So it's actually only for the victims that fell of Dutch Indies or Indo-European nationality. So basically the more Dutch people in the Dutch East Indies society. This monument does not in any way represent the colonial wars that happened, the independence war, the genocides that the Dutch commit to Indonesian islands. So I think this monument is way too short in terms of what it represents. It should be way bigger and broader and more narratives involved. Then there's also a slavery monument that has been established last month, actually. And there has been a lot of discussion what it should represent. And eventually they decided that it should only represent slavery of transatlantic slavery. So people, slavery descendants of the West, so Suriname and Curacao. So slavery and the other colonial aspects of the entire history of people in the Dutch East Indies or Africa are not taken into account in this monument. So I think it's a very interesting dialogue that kind of shows how there's still this friction between these communities of the East and the West. Confirming to me that, hey, maybe we should look into ways or alternative options to see if we can actually give a place to both these communities in which they can commemorate together. Then there's also the Archipelago neighborhood, where you have many street names and direct references to our former colonies. So for example, the Aceh Street. And then, so the things I just mentioned were more direct traces, because you can directly see, the street name or the Indies Monument or Slavery Monument. That's a very direct connection to colonial history. But there's also more indirect traces. For example, Binnenhof. Binnenhof is where our current government is located, but it's also where our government has been located for many, many centuries now. So it's the place from where the colonial era and slavery was legitimized and conducted. So this, in the middle of the screen, you see the Binnenhof area, and eventually Het Plein is also a very interesting location. Het Plein literally means the square. So it's pretty simple. But yeah, this is what it used to look like in the 13th century. So the area that we now know as a Binnenhof is a place where many monarchs started to build their castles and important people. And the area that we now know as the square or Het Plein used to be the gardens of these castles. And then the city of The Hague started growing really fast. So they made plans to fill up this garden area with buildings and houses. But eventually there was a city governor, Frederik Hendrik, and he said, no, The Hague needs this majestic city square. So we need to leave the gardens empty and transform it into a square. So that's how the first ever Dutch square was constructed. And it has been relatively left empty, but last year or last century, it was also a car parking for a while when cars were still very cool to have. But now, since 1980, there was an underground parking garage, 2 levels constructed. So the cars were put out of sight. And now it's just this walking friendly, very open, big square space. And it's interesting to look at the buildings that are surrounding this square, because there's a lot of friction and tension in there. First of all, we have the Binnenhof area, which I just mentioned, where our government is located. It consists out of Tweede Kamer, which is the area where the political party representatives can propose or change laws. And one of these buildings over here in the bottom is the former Ministry of Justice. And the building over here is the former Ministry of Colonies. And I'll further dive into the former Ministry of Colonies in a bit. Then we have the Eerste Kamer. That is a collective of ministers who can reject or approve these new proposals for laws. Then we have the Department of General Affairs, which is the department of the minister-president, so the boss of our country. And then we have the Ridderzaal, which is a very nice, unique building, which is used for a yearly speech by the king. But then this Binnenhof area isn't the only area where our government is located, because there's many, many more departments also further away from this location, but some of them are surrounding het Plein. So for example, we have the Ministry of Defense at the bottom, and we have the former Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the opposite side of het Plein, which is now serving as Tweede Kamer office space. So you can see how het Plein starts to play a role in this function as a government, because people have to cross the square to go from one office to the other, or het Plein starts to play a role in this dynamics. Then in the north, we have Society de Witte, which is a fairly prominent private club. And then we have Mauritshuis, which I'll further elaborate on in a bit. And then there are some spatial elements to take into account on the square. So we have the 4 parking garage houses that you can use to go into the underground parking garage. We have a 14-meter tall statue of Willem van Oranje. It's enormous. You might be used to the size of it in Indonesia, but for us, this is an enormous statue. And Willem van Oranje is the father of our fatherland. But to me, it also represents the royal family in general. And the Dutch royal family played a massive role in our colonial era and made many, many decisions and legitimized horrible things during the colonial period. Then surrounding the square, we have this kind of lane that is marked by linden trees. So it's kind of a circular walking lane almost. And these linden trees, unfortunately, I found a report stating that the linden trees aren't very healthy anymore because the soil isn't very fertile, and also there's a lack of space for the roots to grow because of the underground parking garage. So it's a bit of a question how long these trees will stay up. Then on the right bottom of the square, there's a lot of restaurants and cafes. So it's this het Plein is really known as a space of leisure where you would go for a drink or meet with people. And sometimes it houses smaller protests because it is right in front of Binnenhof. However, most of the bigger protests or more controversial protests are put away to a specific location where people can just protest out of sight without bothering anyone. But I think that's very concerning because protesting also has to do with the right of protesting, and especially usually protests are against governmental decisions and policies. So I think it's a bit concerning that people are usually not allowed to protest here. So this site has a lot of tensions and frictions, from government to people just for leisure, to smaller protests and commemorating the royal family. So there's a lot of things happening on this square, and especially in the upper left corner, very interesting stories start to unravel, especially in relation to my topic of colonial history. Because over here we have Mauritshuis, that is connected to the opposite side of the street through this underground connection. You can see it better here in this section. And it consists out of the original Mauritshuis on the left, which is over here. And the Mauritshuis is currently known as a very world famous collection of Golden Age art pieces. So the Golden Age, very one-sided narrative. But the Mauritshuis was once established as a living house for Johann Maurits van Nassau-Siegen. And he was a very important governor of the Dutch-Brazilian colony. And the nickname of the Mauritshuis is Sugar Palace, because the money that was used to build this house was made out of exploitation of people on sugar plantations and the slavery of these people that were working there. But inside the building, you have no clue about this Sugar Palace or the darker side of this history, because all you see is very impressive interior spaces and art pieces about the Golden Age that are hung up in golden frameworks, golden pieces here and there. So there's nothing much about the dark side of this history, and it's mainly just about celebrating and romanticizing the Golden Age. Then over here we have the former Ministry of Colonies, which is also a very interesting building. It was established in 1861, and it was the first ever building that was built with the intention of becoming a ministry, at least in the Netherlands. And it was designed by William Nicolaas Rosy. The exterior, however, as well as the interior, ended up way more plain and sober than, he originally intended. And it had to do with budget cuttings. There was a lack of money, so it all had to be more sober than he wanted to. And over here we see the transformations that the building has gone through, because the ministry was constantly outgrowing the building. The ministry was growing and growing because we got more colonies and we got more decisions to make, more ministers that were involved in the ministry. So they constantly had to add parts and pieces to the building. And I think the most interesting in this diagram is the fact that on the most left side, and also the second and third image, we see that the front door was still used as the main entrance of the building. But over the years, this has been changed, and nowadays the left upper corner of the building is the main circulation space and the main entrance of the area, because this is where the building is connected to the rest of Binnenhof. So the front door is actually, somewhat disregarded. We don't use it anymore, and it's very different from what it used to be. Because if we look over here, we see how this is the original entrance. So we can see how when you used to enter the entrance, you had this prestigious staircase that would lead you up to the first floor. There was this clear connection between ground floor and first floor. And we see these very decorative columns on the first floor. There was really this idea of prestigious welcoming of people. And nowadays, there's no connection between the two floors anymore. And a lot of the columns have been removed, and just rooms have been made on top on the first floor. So if we look at a picture, this is the only thing on the first floor left from this once very prestigious entrance. It is now just these columns, but other than that, they don't really bother anymore to revive this ambience and this prestigious ambience that it used to have. Then there is another thing that is also very interesting in the building. There's a very strong sense of hierarchy. So the first floor was the most important floor. That's where the most important people had their offices and had meetings. And then you had the second and third floor. And the bottom floor was for the least important people. So for facility and support people. So it kind of symbolizes a metaphor for me, how you have these people above that are oppressing the people underneath that are supposedly not worth it, which is also this kind of structure that was happening in the Dutch colonies. So we can see on the bottom floor, there used to be this archive space, and it used to be a very nice open space that would go from the front to the back of the building. But over the years, it had been changed into smaller office spaces. And then on the first floor, especially in the corner offices, those were the most important offices where the most important people were doing their job. So over here, we have the corner office, and you can see how it is compared to the rest of the sober interior. Pretty wildly decorated and detailed, and still pretty much intact, because this picture is taken 1 or 2 years ago. It still looks like this. And for the other office goes the same. And then we have the Regentenkamer, which is supposedly the most heavily loaded room of the entire building. It looks like this. And the thing with this room is that it was not necessarily intended to look like this. The architect made it way more plain and sober than it looks now. But in 1889, the ministry was expecting or welcoming very important monarchs from the Dutch Indies colonies. And they were so ashamed of their building because it was such a sober and plain interior. And how would they welcome these super important people, and where would they have the meeting, that they decided to do a super fast renovation of this room. So they brought in all the pink colors and all the portrait panels. So we see a massive portrait of Queen Wilhelmina. This is where they had the meetings. And also smaller portraits of very important governors of all the Dutch colonies. And we have a very detailed ceiling painting, also with hints to these overseas colonies that we see over here. And there's a quote above the doors saying, "Daar kan in Indië wat groots verricht worden." And this literally means there in the Dutch East Indies, something great can be established. So that was the ambience of the room and of the prestigious colonial mindset, I would say. And despite that, I mainly focused when researching this building on the link to the colonial era, because it used to serve as a Ministry of Colonies. I also must mention that during World War II, it was the headquarters of Johann Baptist Albert, and he was the leader of the Dutch SS. So he was responsible for the deportation of hundreds and thousands of Jews in the Netherlands. So I think it is important to mention, despite the fact that those histories might seem different from each other, they are intertwined, and they all took place behind the walls of this building. And massive decisions have been made inside the walls of this building that have influenced and had consequences for many different communities all over the world. So to quickly summarize, we have this Mauritshuis, a story about the Dutch Golden Age. We have the former Ministry of Colonies, where a lot of hidden stories about decisions that were made and the consequences of those decisions. And I wanted to design some type of memorial, but I wasn't planning on making a very typical memorial or monument that would impose a very one-sided narrative. I wanted to involve multiple narratives. And so when I dove into the theory, I found out about the affirmative memorial, which is a memorial typology that represents a plurality of perspectives rather than just one narrative, which seemed to fit perfectly for my design. Especially the feature of an open archive was very interesting. So here you see an example of such an open archive, where all these portraits of different people and all their different stories are placed parallel and next to each other. So I thought, why don't we use the very building that has this very heavily loaded historical link to colonial era to place this archive, this open archive? On one hand, an archive about the ministry, because most people in the Netherlands have no clue that this building used to be the Ministry of Colonies, and that from this building, all those decisions were made on the overseas areas and the slavery. So on one hand, I want to give more transparency about what this ministry used to be and the decisions that were made there. And on the other hand, I think it would be very powerful to claim a few spaces to actually say, hey, this Golden Age narrative isn't the only narrative. There's also Indo-Europeans and Moluccans and Indonesians and people from Suriname and from Curaçao that have other narratives that are also just as valid. But having these two different viewpoints, the Mauritshuis Museum with the Golden Age and the open archive with more the darker side of history next to each other, can be a bit tricky, especially because I mentioned it's a very sensitive topic in our society. And I think in many places in the world, polarization is only increasing. So that's why I was thinking I want to also integrate this space where people can have a peaceful dialogue with each other. So that's how I ended up with the agonistic space, which is a space within a democratic political environment in which the inevitable variety of positions and opinions are permitted space for dialogue and discussion. Speaker's Corner is only one of the few practical examples, because usually the agonistic space is still very much in the academic sphere. And it isn't very much about very specific spatial qualities, but it has more to do with the intention of the designer, process of designing and building, and the management of space. But I soon realized that the square would be a perfect location for this agonistic space, because it would be able to connect society and the passerby and the people using the square with these two buildings and the narratives inside these buildings. Then how would I translate this agonistic space into architecture? And my inspiration for that actually came from my trip to Indonesia, because when I was at ITB, but also at other universities, I learned about Indonesian vernacular architecture. And there was one, I know that there's many, many typologies in Indonesia, but there was one typology that kind of, stuck to me. It was the Toba Batik. And we see it over here. I made a model out of it. And the thing that intrigued me most, I wasn't really planning on literally copying the architecture, because I'm only just a Dutch woman who went to Indonesia once and read a book about it. Doesn't mean that I can actually establish this typology. But there were some values on a more abstract level that I found very inspiring and that I wanted to integrate in my design. So for example, how dominant the roof is in relation to the rest of the architecture, or how the use of local materials in the bottom part seemed to be braided into one another. It kind of felt like this aesthetical piece of braiding and constructing. And I was also very intrigued by the 3 different layers of the typology. So the upper world, the middle world, and the underworld. So eventually I decided to, or I came up with this design for the House of Free Speech. That's how I would like to call my agonistic space. And this House of Free Speech, to be able to connect it to the Mauritshuis Museum and the Open Archive, I decided to make this underground system, not only to physically connect the 3 institutes with each other, but also to make this symbolical connection, because all these stories should be tied together into one complete story. And now to quickly further explain my design, I'll take you along with it so you can actually experience what it does and what it can be. So if you would arrive on the plan, you would see this interesting structure in the middle of all these brick buildings of wooden structure. And you can now see also from the top how this central statue of Willem van Oranje isn't the only centerpiece of attention at the square anymore. There's now also this wooden pavilion pulling gravity towards itself. And the pavilion is continuing on the underlying grid of the parking garage. And it also starts to play a role in this circular lane of linden trees. And it puts this kind of tunnel effect towards the former Ministry of Colonies building. So the wooden pavilion is made out of 7 spans, and you can see how these inclined beams are kind of braided into one another. Just like all these historical tales are braided into one another, all these different narratives. And you can imagine that this space could be nice on a sunny day when you are looking for some shade, but it could also house other events, for example, Pasar Malam, where Dutch Indies, Indo-European and Indonesian culture can be celebrated. Or it could house protests, for example, that create this link between our colonial history and events that are happening nowadays. It could also house an outdoor exhibition, for example, about the connection between the communities of the East and the West. And you can constantly see with this flexible program infill how the pavilion and the actual program kind of have this relation to each other. Because, for example, with this outdoor exhibition, things can be hung up on the structure that we see over here. And there's more things that we notice. For example, if we zoom in, there's these benches that are integrated in between the beams with the backrest leaning against the inclined beam of the structure. Then we have the foot detail. If we zoom in more, we see that there's lamps hidden in the concrete foot detail, which cause it to light up like a lantern during the night. Then we see the rain gutter that kind of frames the wooden pavilion as if a painting is being framed. But if we zoom in further, we see that it's perforated. So during days of heavy rainfall, we see that the rain is still falling alongside the pavilion, but this causes a kind of water curtain to occur, emphasizing with the tunnel effect towards the Ministry of Colonies building. And then if you approach the pavilion from the other side, you see how the design intentions of the open and closed spaces in the roof. So we have windows and we have more solid wooden areas in the roof, how it kind of influences the light that falls underneath. So on the sides, you have more intimate and shadowed spaces. And in the middle, along the central axis, there's more of a very light and open ambience. Then there's this staircase from which you can go down to the underground system. So that's over here. So if we would look at it in section, it means that after this pavilion and staircase, you would enter this underground room that is also subject to flexible program infill. So you could maybe imagine that the Malaccan community had written a text about their relation to colonial history and how it still involves them nowadays. And this text could be projected. But we could also say that we want to project, for example, the millions of names of people in Dutch society that have a direct link to Dutch colonial history. It could also be a place where the more open and public debate that takes place in the pavilion can become more intimate and small. So if you just place a table and some chairs in this area, it can be a more intimate debate. So it is subject to flexible program infill. And if you would then continue inside the former Ministry of Colonies, we see how this triple floor space unfolds. So it kind of references back to the original entrance, but in a new way. So we can see here in the model that it's a very prestigious looking space, and there's these columns, and there's this relation between all the floors. And if you go all the way up, we enter this kind of library space or working space. So you can see how these original columns are back to how they used to be, but also there seems to be this dialogue between elements and furniture that refer to the old and original building, but also, for example, the wooden furniture that has been added now. And this dialogue for me represents this dialogue between the old and new, the dialogue between the old way of looking at colonial history and now allowing new perspectives in the form of new wooden materials inside the building, and creating this bigger and more complete image. So if we were to walk through the building, we're still on the first floor. If we would go to the space over here, and then the corner office that I mentioned before, this used to be the former minister office. And I could imagine how the interior could be left intact and the space could, for example, be completely empty, except for one wooden table on which certain documents can be put. Documents from the archive of the ministry that showcase what kind of decisions have been made, what people worked in this office. And then maybe every month or 2 months, other documents can be placed over there and people can start to gain the knowledge about the ministry and the history behind it. And the other corner office on the other side of the floor could have a similar infill. Then we have the Regentenkamer, which was this room. And I decided to again leave the interior intact, but only replace the furniture with wooden furniture again. And in the chairs, I have added some sisal weave, which is from the tropical agave plant, again using it as a metaphor to allow new narratives and new perspectives into this heavily loaded historical room. And I could also potentially see this room being the new reading room of the archive. So this place that is so heavily loaded, where all these supposedly important people made big decisions and were romanticizing the colonial era and legitimizing it. This could now be the room where people with new perspectives and a more critical eye can do their research and conduct their archival research of this open archive. And then when you walk past the hallways, it is interesting that only a few spaces of this building are used for the archive. So it means that on the opposite side of the building, it is still what it is today, Tweede Kamer offices. So offices of the political people that are nowadays still forming our future and making big decisions that have a lot of impact on a lot of communities and a lot of people. So you have also inside this building, this friction between history and present and future, and this constant connection between the different layers. If we would go from the first floor to the ground floor level, over here we have this archive of unheard stories. So this floor is more determined for the narratives that have always been silenced or not acknowledged or unheard. So how I would imagine the process of archiving this is, for example, this is a small sculpture that my grandmother had made, or an artist had made for my grandmother because it represents a story of my grandmother in one of the internment camps. And since he passes away, we now have the sculpture in our family. So what we could do is I could, for example, go to this archive of unheard stories and say, hey, I have this sculpture, and there's one page of text explaining the story behind the sculpture. Other than that, I don't know. And then they could do this interview, and they could make pictures or video or a transcript of the interview. And then this entire story can be digitalized into a digital archive. And then they would say, okay, you can take your object back home, or they can say, if you're open for it, you can exhibit your object in this archive of unheard stories. So what you would then get is this space where all these different types of objects, from diaries to photos to carpets to pieces of clothing to sculptures, are all placed in the same room next to each other. And all these objects don't have to do with just one or two specific communities, but they are from all these different communities, from Indo-Europeans to people from Suriname to people from Curacao. It's all in between, next to, parallel to each other, because that's also the fact in our society. All these people be holding these different narratives. And if you would go back to the basement again, there's one hallway that we haven't really seen yet. So I would like to explain that hallway to finish up. And in this hallway, it isn't just a corridor that goes from this underground space to the underground entrance for Mauritshuis Museum, but I intended to make these 3 short intermezzos because I just didn't want people to blindly go towards Mauritshuis and then look at the Golden Age art. But I was thinking of moments of pause and moments of reflection. So that's why I made these intermezzos. Each of these intermezzos is related to one of the 3 institutes. So one for Mauritshuis, one for the Open Archive in the former ministry building, and one of the House of Free Speech, the pavilion on the plein. So if we look at this section, we see how the design of the daylight also plays a role in these intermezzos, because during the day, natural light falls onto the objects or art pieces, and during the night there's artificial light emphasizing with it. And here we see in the hallway how this play of light kind of causes these moments of pause. So despite the fact that the tiles and the rough plaster on the walls really create this sense of movement, you have these pockets that kind of make you stop and wonder and take a look at it. And this hallway kind of represents that it isn't just a hallway to go from A to B, but also a symbolical connection between the stories of Mauritshuis, the former Ministry of Colonies, and the House of Free Speech Pavilion. And to shortly end with my project itself, I wanted to say that it took me over a year to come up with the project, to do the research, and to translate it into a design. And it was only a bit at the end that I started to realize that it isn't about the design itself. To me, it isn't about the specific architectural and design decisions that I made. I see the decisions that I made as a potential option. We could design a pavilion like this. We could place a wooden table in a former minister office. We could do it like that. But I don't think it's the only way or the right way to do it. To me, it is more that my design kind of showcases an alternative way of how we could deal with such complex histories, especially in the buildings that are so much related to this heavily loaded history. So yeah, it isn't about the design itself, but rather about the dialogue that it hopefully provokes. So a very short follow-up. After my graduation, I was asked to exhibit my work at the Day of Architecture in The Hague. So I did this outdoor exhibition on the exact site of where I was thinking of the pavilion. So it was very interesting to be on the site that I was designing for. And in addition to the project material that I already had, I also made this small table about the archive of unheard stories. So I actually brought the archive to life, because over here we see a table with different objects. So this is a a family recipe book from someone from Suriname. Here we have some items from an Indo-European woman. Here we have a book also about a family history of Suriname. Here we have pictures of the Indo-African community. And for all these people that exhibited their object, I also interviewed them and made short podcast episodes to find out more about the story behind the object and their relation to colonial history. And yeah, so now I don't know what the future will bring for me, but I have my freelance practice, Studio Nynke. And as I was introduced already, I have studied architecture. So my background is in architecture, but I see way more potential in other, in other things as well. So designing, storytelling, connecting through art, research, writing, graphic design, all other things. So for me, it isn't specifically about the architecture, as Anneke said already, but mainly about the topics that I'm addressing. So yeah, you can find my website and my contact details if you want to follow up on what I'm gonna do in my future, because I don't know myself yet. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nynke. It's very reflective. It's a very reflective presentation. If I may give some background knowledge as well. For me, it's a really new insights that you have different view on what's happening in Dutch Indies, because when you saw some buildings in Kota Tua or in Semarang, in Kota Tua, I work, people like me, architect like me, works to preserve what has been done in the previous time. We are not celebrating the colonialism for sure, but we are celebrating how the Dutch engineers are celebrating our climate, our tropical climate, with European knowledge. So the material choices, the color, the composition, everything. So the building itself is also already a knowledge. And I think you should travel more, because you said your limitation time before, but I think you have more time in the future. There will be, Indonesia consists of 1,300 suku, small islands with different culture, so different architecture as well. I saw that you refer your design from one of our vernacular architecture from North Sumatra, right? While in Bandung, Henry McLean Pond is designing a building reference from West Sumatra. So different area, different province has different type of architecture. I want to ask a question, because I think the audience hasn't raised any question yet, but so I will start questioning for you. How did you start? You said you need 1 year to reflect this and to start your research. What is your trigger? What happened beside the story of your grandmother? What other reason starts you as an architecture student to start your research?
I think for me, it wasn't necessarily my grandmother, actually. I think it was more the research that I wrote a year before about this disbalance of narratives in our Dutch public spaces. And also I feel like, especially since, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, there has been more attention for other narratives, finally, and the idea that the white supremacy is not necessarily a good thing and that we should be critical on it. And I feel like I have been very much involved in getting myself a lot of knowledge about the Black Lives Matter movement, but also about this colonial era, and then thinking to myself, oh, but what I learned in history class in school was so one-sided and so whitewashed. And also, for example, when I did this research paper, I wrote about this monument in the Netherlands. And that's when I looked into Commander Van Heuts, because it used to be the Van Heuts monument. And I unraveled all these things about history, like what happened in Aceh, and then I learned about the Indonesian Independence War. I didn't learn about the Indonesian Independence War. It got taught to me in the sense that it was police actions because there was unrest in the Indonesian colony. So we had to take action. I didn't know it was the bloodiest war that the Dutch had ever fought in history. I didn't know so many things. So that's when I started to realize I should be critical on how these narratives and these historical stories have been taught to me in school, but also what we see in our public spaces. Because if we only have statues of J.P. Koen and other former commanders, society is going to think, oh, we need to celebrate these people without knowing the other side of the story. So it really triggered me like, hey, this isn't really honest. We should really take action and yeah, improve the palette of narratives and involve the bigger story in this.
All right. I feel your big empathy. Thank you very much for that. But I think you should also, well, the colonialism is the history, and we learn. I learned colonialism during my school period. But then we also have a very good education from the convent, which delivered from the Netherlands to Indonesia. For example, like Ursuline convent, they built a very proper, very reasonable education for Dutch Indies at that time after VOC. So I think there's still a lot of good legacy that we receive, especially in education and building and architecture knowledge. Mungkin ada yang sudah bertanya, atau kalau belum ada yang bertanya, boleh ya saya mengundang audiens. Pak Yuda boleh berkomen tentang mungkin salah satu bangunan yang diadaptif reuse saat ini, misalnya Kemenlu gitu. Mungkin bisa bercerita. If you don't mind, I will invite one of the audience. He is the leader of our architecture council in Indonesia, and he's also an heritage expert.
Okay.
Don't say that.
Nggak boleh ya? Please,
Nggak
Pak Yuda, if you
Okay.
may.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Anneke, one of my best friends with us. Halo, Ibu Mbak Nynke Stam. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so glad to hear and listen to your explanation on a different approach as a Dutch to a situation that most probably would be different from Indonesian approaching the issue, right? But the concept maybe is, as Ibu Anneke mentioned before, is rather new, since you put forward more multi narratives rather than one single approach, and not just about the design, but as Ibu Anneke again mentioned, is about the empathy and trying to understand the facts about the fiction, right? So,
Yeah.
so then you're trying to make sense of the whole situation before you decided that maybe as a program related to the 1, 2, 3 important building in the past with its function in the past. So how it gonna be make sense from now present times to the futures, to reconnect the cultural connection between, say, the Netherlands and the Indonesian, the Suriname, the other countries that used to be in the past. It's kind of a dark ages. As long as we thought now, since I thought that in those days that narrative is absent, right? It's not there. So sometimes for us in Indonesia, when approaching an architectural situation like this, we have to decide that we don't want to judge, as Ibu Anneke mentioned. We just want to praise the achievement of the engineers, the architecture, because Indonesia is pemaaf, right? It's easy to forgive, right?
Forgive.
Or maybe in inverse situation, easy to forget. That's the problem with Indonesian, easy to forget. Maybe easy to forgive as well. But that's the nature of Indonesian that, well, it's been done, and what else? We just focus on now and tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem of Indonesians, Ibu Anneke. Sometimes we erase
Yeah.
the history without knowing how important this structure or this architectural legacies. But that's another problem for Indonesian dealing with the colonial heritage. So there's no hatred because we forget. There's no hatred because we easily forgive, even though, yes, the record in the history is there. There is a visual recording or the narrative, a story, essay, etc. But your approach here give an additional strategy how to deal with the current issues that raise, especially in Netherlands. And maybe we can learn a lot from what you did or what you have done. And I think we need more to expose this kind of approach in different situations, though that kind of exercise would give a benefit to us in Indonesia. Maybe sometimes somebody, Ibu Anneke was invited to The Hague, maybe for making ideas or competition. I don't know. We need to have an opportunity to do something in Netherlands as well, right? We never do that. A lot of Dutch architects already got projects in Indonesia in the past, right? Even now.
Yeah.
But how many Indonesian projects in Netherlands? That's zero, right?
You maybe need to start
No. I mean,
bigger,
as an
wider collaboration.
exercise
Yes.
between the Delft University and ITB, maybe. I
Yes.
don't know. I mean, so we can exercise this kind of approach and tell our friend in Netherlands that this is the way Indonesian do the attack the issues. Maybe a little bit different, but all the theory was there. The narrative could be different angles, but maybe more exercise would be benefit to both parties, But thank you very
Right.
much for the very
Okay.
interesting presentation, and looking forward for the next one.
Baik.
Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Yuda. Okay, Nynke, continuing commenting on your design. It's very interesting how you inspired from vernacular Indonesian with the roofing style. How did you come up, or how did it when you present it to your lecturer? How are the responses? Because it's totally different, and it's
Yeah.
like cutting all the composition and all the situation there. Maybe you could
Yeah.
explain about that.
Yeah, so I must say that the pavilion design was the most complex thing that I have been doing for this project. And it had to do with the fact that when I came back from Indonesia, I had sat on the site in The Hague where I wanted to design, and I said, okay, I feel like I want to do this thing with the agonistic space, and it could be a pavilion, it could be something on the square. And also when I came back from Indonesia, I had learned about all these different typologies, but especially somehow the Toba Batik, it kind of stuck to me. I don't know why. It was just this typology that very much interested me. So I borrowed some books from the library to read more about vernacular architectural typologies and also the Toba Batik more specifically. And then it took me just a couple of months to find my positionality within this context, because at the end of the day, I'm only just a 25-year-old woman from the Netherlands who went to Java for 3 weeks, to the bigger cities, and heard about this typology or saw a model at one of the universities and now read 2 books about it. So I felt very uncomfortable to, okay, what is my position in this? What is my responsibility in this? And I want to avoid saying, okay, I'm this woman from Europe, and I have seen this vernacular typology of yours, and now I can redo it, but differently or in a better way, or I'm gonna make it European or something, because I was so conscious of this entire colonial history and colonial mindset that I wanted to be very aware that in no way I wanted to disrespect vernacular typologies that have been in these specific communities for generations and generations, and that have all these specific knowledge in them that I cannot learn from reading a book or seeing a picture. So that's where I really started to struggle with my positionality. But then I kind of found a way to see on a more abstract level the most important values to me in that vernacular typology. And I also thought, because this typology is very specific for this one area in Sumatra, and Indonesia is way bigger than that, but also I said that I also want to include other colonial parts of our history, this Suriname and Curacao and Africa. So why would I make this very, very specific Indonesian vernacular typology and say that I want everyone to feel welcome underneath this roof? So that's why I kind of felt like I was looking for a type of architecture that wouldn't really exclude people. So it was based on the abstract values of the Toba Batek, but also I did it in a completely different way in order to create this kind of, this kind of neutral zone that for many people doesn't really have a lot of associations, and just, okay, it's a roof. It's a bit weird because it's a wooden roof in a brick setting, but it's also just a roof. I think to me also, because the topic is so sensitive in Dutch society, I was also looking for a way to make a very low barrier for people to enter such a memorial space. So if you create a roof that people want to step under for shading, or they see this exhibition and they're just curious to see what it is, and then they start to learn, oh, this roof is actually representing this space, and oh, it's connected through the underground to the other buildings. I didn't know about it. Maybe we should go and explore. Because very often with such sensitive topics, there are people that are just beforehand already against exploring this other narrative, or that are not really interested in diving into such a topic because it's so controversial and complex. So I was also, in the design of the pavilion, looking for a way to make a low barrier for people to explore it and to find a spot, and then in a very low barrier way get in touch with the topic of colonial history without being overwhelmed and without being, oh, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm gonna leave. So yeah, it was a struggle. It was a long struggle. Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, in some points within your explanation, I agree with what Pak Yuda said, because in the history period, there are thousands of buildings was designed and built for Indonesia, and you yourself from this generation is interested to our vernacular architecture. So
Yeah.
maybe it's a good possibilities to have a collaboration workshop to acknowledge each other architectural benefits, especially for through the climate, because from Batak Toba, maybe you pronounce it as head, body, and foot, but actually the local philosophy why they build the house like that is because in the previous time most of Indonesian has cattle. So
Yeah.
below the houses are for
it's for the cattle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but I think it's very interesting how you adapt the shape and the knowledge for your design and get into the philosophy of from our architecture. Thank you for the answer. Okay, now the audience has already has questions. Okay, from Via. I'm curious about how general Dutch people perceive Dutch colonialism, since Nynke said she was not aware of Dutch architecture in Indonesia before coming here. Is it really
Yeah.
erased from general history? dumbed down or simplified or purposely forgotten due to sensitivity? Since Dutch left
Um,
cultural impact, it is just bizarre.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of those things actually, and I'm also not sure. I'm also still planning on continuing to fight for it in at least our architectural education to get it more on the forefront and to make sure that students at least get one lecture or one small part about the colonial architecture that we left in our overseas areas. I think most of it because we are very oriented on the Western world here in Europe, I think in general. We are mainly, especially in architecture history, we are looking into this entire history of the Romans and the Greeks and what happened here and in Italy and there and in France. It's all about here. And I think in general, that's just such a waste because in the non-Western world, there's so many interesting things in terms of architecture and urbanism and planning. There's so many interesting lessons that we can learn from each other because it's not that one of them is better than the other. I think it's just different and we can just learn from it. So I think it's in general a waste that we're so focused on the West, but also I think it's super weird that our Western architecture, so we can still have it about Western architecture, is also located in all these other places in the world. And they never, like, I never knew that when I went to Indonesia, I never expected it to look like this. It was literally like I was walking in the Netherlands, only the facades were made white. I never expected this to happen because I just simply didn't know. I never got taught about it. So
Well,
yeah.
I don't know, and maybe Fia also don't know how you would know that. I don't know how the reference. We have so many books about Dutch in this period architecture, and it is either in Dutch, English, or Indonesian. And there are a lot of works of local architects, Indonesian architect who works on preserving
Yeah.
the Dutch era architecture.
Yeah.
Also, we study the building at school during our learning period and also working period. So there are so many workshops on site is done on the actual Dutch in this period buildings. So I think there are also already a lot of books on that.
Yeah,
And
there's so much knowledge. So I don't know why we don't get it in our school. I don't know why we
well,
don't learn about it.
so far I know about heritage building for writings, picture photographs, and other preservation works. We always collaborate with the Netherlands and Erasmus House, and most of the books are presented in both countries. I think you should, I don't know, maybe you should look more in Amsterdam. There's a lot of knowledge about this. And if you said you want to fight for this period of architecture and architecture style in your campus, maybe you should also know that until today, our construction site worker, even they're not speaking Dutch, we still have Dutch terminology
Yeah,
on
I know.
site. So, oh, you know, okay,
Yeah, I learned about it
so
when I was in Indonesia, that there's a lot of overlap between Dutch terms in architecture and the Indonesian words that are used for it.
yeah, it's still used because we learned the technology from the Netherlands, from the Dutch people, right? So, for example, like I talk with the worker on site, like bouwplank, lisplank, slope, right? So,
Yeah.
we have so many things in common, and we still study about the building because, like I said before, we celebrate how the colonialism is actually celebrating our climate with all the design, with how the big windows are shaped, how the colors are chosen, how the material are decided. Even now, today, we are very fabricating. We are very industrial. We do industrial design after the 70s, right? So that's why we're still learning about the early period of the 20th century, because there's so many interesting building. Actually, one of the building I work on in Kota Tua, Jakarta, is called Rotterdam Lloyd, because the building the building was built because of the trade journey from Rotterdam by the Lloyd Maritime Society to Batavia, back and forth. And there are so many stories in the stained glass about Rotterdam. So that's why we learn about your history. I think you should also learn about our history and
Yeah.
the, the the gap between that you said, right?
Yeah.
Maybe so what I get is in the Netherlands, the history is like very disconnected with whatever happening in that's in this. Is that
Yes.
true?
Yeah, and the things that we did know or learn about the Dutch East Indies was only the positive things. So we got very wealthy, we did the trading, we were just very good pioneers in that time in terms of traveling and trading. We were one of the first like bigger companies that was established, and it was all good, because here in the Netherlands we had profit of it. That's the only thing in general we learn also in our schools in general history lessons. And I mean, over the last couple of years, there has been some small steps and small changes, and also in the curriculum, what they teach about history in our high schools. But yeah, when I went to high school, I hardly learned anything about it. I had no clue.
Oh, then I think your Ministry of Education need to collaborate with our Ministry
I
of
think so too.
Education.
I think so too.
Yeah, to set up new curricula, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Ada lagi Mbak Pia
what?
mau menyampaikan
Because
curhat apa lagi?
I
Boleh?
found like Bu Anneke said before, like the construction of from the Netherlands is we even learned the construction from the Netherlands. People that built buildings here with our climate. That is an invention, a quite something to celebrate, and I still don't get it if in the Dutch people the doesn't know their own invention like that. They actually build something in tropical country and properly like, and you don't know that your own invention other than colonialism. It is also an invention to me, something like that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's very true. I think one of the biggest point here is that the foundings of the how the heritage colonial heritage building celebrating our very humid and tropical country, all from the roof until the roof, attic, column sizes of windows until the foundation. I think you should have that in your campus, in your
Yeah,
country, right? Because
I
that's
agree.
what we learn about why we preserve, because there's so many deep knowledge on how to combine tropical humidity and heat with an architecture without air conditioning system.
Yeah.
Oke. Mungkin ada lagi yang masih mau bertanya atau semua lagi merenung? Ini belum ada pertanyaan lagi ya. Okay, let me ask you another question about your journey to Java. Which city do you think you get most knowledge for your research?
Ooh, I think that's a that's a difficult question, because I feel like in every city I learned something else, and also in all cities I had contact people, so people from Indonesia that would that I could have a conversation with. So either people that are within the architectural heritage in Indonesia, but also just people who don't necessarily have a background in architecture. So I could also talk to just the Indonesian citizen and their perception on this history and this architecture. I feel like Jakarta probably, I was there for the longest, and also it has, yeah, there was a lot of it. It was in Jakarta because I spoke to most people there. I think to most, like I visited university and PDA and had other conversations. And well, it was the first impression of this old city center. So in Kota Tua was the first time that I was like, I'm on the other side of the world, but it looks so Dutch. This is so weird. And I saw children biking on the square. So that was weird to me. And above that, my grandmother was born and raised in former Batavia. So I was able to track down the location of where her house was located. And also I went
Where
to,
is it? Where
it's
is it?
in Menteng. It's in Menteng.
Wow. So
but yeah, but
I
it's
think
a different
your
house now.
grandmother is Pak Yuda's neighbor.
Oh,
Pak Yuda live in Menteng.
jalan apa? Which street?
Which street?
I can look it up after. I don't have it right with me, but I can
Okay.
send you after.
Okay.
But and
Okay.
also
You
in
look.
Jakarta, you also have the neighborhood of Cideng.
All right.
And Cideng used to be the biggest internment camp in Batavia. I also noticed when I went to Indonesia and spoke to people, many people don't really know that there were internment camps and that like the Japanese captured the Dutch Indies people. Maybe it was just people that I spoke
Sorry?
to. Many
Inter what?
people, internment camps. So
Interneran.
Oh, internment camps. Okay. Okay.
yeah. I felt like many people didn't really know that this happened and that the Japanese had captured Dutch Indies and Indo-European people. But for example, Cideng was a massive internment camp, and it was the last camp that my grandmother was staying at. And it was really weird because now it's just a neighborhood where people live and do their thing and live their life. And there's no reference whatsoever to the camp that used to be there and the victims that fell and the horrible things that the people there experienced. So that was also, yeah, Jakarta just had this personal story to me, but also, yeah, a lot of conversations that I had and the first impressions and the things that I learned. A lot of museums as well that I visited in Jakarta, and also the Monument Nasional and the other monuments that I saw.
And all are in Indies architecture, right?
Yeah.
Or were built within the period of the colonialism. Okay. And have you had the opportunity to learn about the Keraton Jogja, where the palace in Jogja?
Yeah, very shortly. I went to Jogja and I learned about a few of those palaces. I visited two, I think. But I feel like there's so many more stories to unravel in Jogja because it has a very rich culture, I believe. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of time to fully dive into that, unfortunately.
You have to stay in Indonesia for
Yeah, I have to come back.
another month. Okay. Maybe I want to mention again about adaptive reuse, why we preserve the buildings. Maybe your project itself, the buildings still do their daily operational, right? While in Indonesia, most of the building, a lot of the building is not used anymore and mostly abandoned. That's why there are movement to revitalize and preserve and redo, doing the replica of the existing buildings, but put different function inside. Maybe if you next go to Jakarta, you have to go to Gedung Kesenian Jakarta, where art is performed originally for performing art, nowadays still used as performance, or other places. And you were in Monas, surrounding Monas, there are buildings with different function, which is new function for our national operation, our country. Oke, mungkin dari Pak Yuda mau mengomentari lagi tentang adaptive reuse dari bangunan misalnya Maramis atau Kemenlu atau gedung lain.
Yeah, it's on behalf of other participants. We found it's difficult to. We found it's pretty difficult to deal with the adaptive reuse as mentioned by Ibu Anneke, since our knowledge from the college, our education is more focused on modern architectures, modern technology. Even we don't learn more on brick structures or even timber architectures, even though in recent days, timbers got their own popularity, gained the popularity in a different way. But what we found most in the colonial building is different structure that we are not familiar with that. So when we're trying to renovate, it's a lack of knowledge to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's pretty difficult and frustrating in a way. Bu Anneke knows what's happened in Kota Tua. So we encourage Indonesian young architects or who interested in adaptive use of colonial buildings, dig more information from the library or maybe from looking directly to the building itself in Surabaya, in Bandung, or in Jakarta. That's the only way to experience the way the old people in the old days construct the building. Otherwise, we could make a lot of mistakes when we're trying to repair or to rehabilitate, to renovate the building in a good ways. So my experience, even we are not pretty familiar with the order, even if it's Doric or Ionic or Corinthian, the proportion, the size of the columns, all the details and ornaments that follow the orders is rather strange. We have to deal with that in the building, in the White Palace of Daendels, for example. A lot of small detail is not part of our culture. So we have to find books or reference, even if there are images from Google's. It's just images. We have to know how they calculate the ornaments, put it maybe in a certain ways and all those things. So we need more. But the point, as you mentioned before, it's not just about the past, but it's about how to put all the past for the sake of the futures, right? With the new narrative and perspective. Otherwise, it's become ruins or become collector's items that could be abandoned in the near futures. And we need that memories, but not just for the sake of the past, but for the future. So Ibu Anneke is one of the prominent provocators in the preservation. I think she's good in that situation, heroines in a way. So let's work together, ITB and Delft and other university in a collaboration to do something better for two of our nations. So good luck for your next project then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Yuda. So I think, Nynke, you are very lucky. We are very lucky to have your point of view and have this discussion, because I think I would love to meet you in person if you again come to Indonesia, because
Yes.
I think your point of view has has enriched our view as Indonesian, because we didn't know. We didn't know that the glorifying is only one-sided, and while we here, it's about studying and digging and collecting data about the knowledge that was founded by your country, actually,
Yeah.
your colonialism. Yeah? So it's a great. I think if it's going to be a collaboration between knowledges between campuses, I think it's going to be very interesting, because you could dig more about vernacular architecture. Especially Indonesian architecture is very deep, has very deep knowledge on tectonica, because we are in the Ring of Fire location. So it's tropical, earthquake proof, flooding proof actually.
Yeah.
But all the Dutch engineers' invention with material in some of part of the cities could cover that problem. So that's why we still digging the knowledge. Like Pak
Yeah.
Yuda said, we are the one who need to document, do the documentation, do the picturing, and do all the data digging because we don't know what happened. We cannot interview the architects, so we are interviewing the building. We communicate with
Yeah.
the building. Benar ya Pak? Kita
Bener banget, nggak bisa interview arsiteknya udah mati.
betul. We cannot interview the
Kurikulum
architect.
kita juga nggak ngajarin terlalu detail, apalagi teknik-teknik itu kan. All the structure
Betul.
technology is gone now in the campus, so that's the problem.
So
So
I
we have to
think,
dig. Yeah, we have to dig more.
yeah, I think reading what Nynke mentioned about the curriculum, about maybe the modern architecture and history that you learn, maybe we have similarity nowadays. We learn almost a similar architecture, construction, and fabrication, while actually we have so many knowledge which is actually collaborating within the previous period, which needs to be elaborate and digged and written, rewrite the history. So I think I need more comments from other city, but I think you should visit more cities with local Indonesian architecture,
Yeah.
like maybe Cirebon or Desa Adat. Desa Adat is a very vernacular ecosystem, different lifestyle of living. Maybe you should try if you do you love to go camping or outdoorsy or not at all.
That's
You
fine
have
for me.
oh, fine for you. Okay, then you have to try. Mungkin dari audience ada yang mau raise hand, ada yang mau bertanya lagi. Kalau malas ngetik, kita mungkin sebentar lagi akan selesai.
Bu Anneke, maybe can I ask a question?
Boleh dong, silakan.
So Nynke, your building is located in Netherlands, which means in a subtropical country. So as I heard from your presentation, you inspired from Batak Toba building roof, which is built in tropical country. So can you tell us, please, what is your structural or technical strategies to cope the snow load and to maintain the durability of wood materials? Because it's located in outdoor area, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I think, that's a very good question because the climate is so different here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of the structure, I made these 7 spans that are consisting out of these several columns and that have these inclined beams that are kind of braided into one another. And I made all these different models on different scales and put the spans behind each other and put a roof on there and see how much weight it could have. So eventually, in terms of some rough calculations, it determined that for the rain and the snow, which will also just slope downwards, and especially also the wind forces, they are very important in the west of the Netherlands because we're near to the sea, so it can get pretty windy. But yeah, I've put it in all these calculation programs, civil engineering programs, to see if it can hold the forces. So that is okay. And in terms of the wood, there is opportunities to, I don't know how you say it, to put this top coating on the wood to make sure that it stays intact. But on the other hand, and that's also to me, like I made this pavilion design, but it's still up for dialogue to me because on the other hand, I could also see this kind of metaphor in the idea that the wood would kind of, change in color because of the rain or the wind conditions, and that it would change over time because I'm kind of challenging this entire idea of to what degree should a monument or a memorial space be static and to what degree should it be flexible and changeable over time, just as society is. So you can also play with that in terms of materialization and tectonics. Yeah, I haven't had the time to even further explore that concept. So for me, the roof is still up to discussion how it would eventually be designed. But yeah, I think it's a good question.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's enough. So cool.
Cukup, Bintang? Masih penasaran
Yeah,
kayaknya.
cukup. Yeah, but yeah, maybe we can talk again in the next opportunity. The details. Okay.
By the way, oke, terima kasih ya Bintan.
Ya, sama-sama Bu.
Iya. Nynke, by the way, how long is your exhibit in the square? Is it
Oh, it was,
already done?
yeah, it was just one day because it was an outdoor exhibition.
One day?
Yeah,
my God.
just one day.
Wow, that's so
Too
short.
bad.
Yeah, way too short.
Yeah.
Maybe you should propose for longer exhibition so you could.
I'm trying to apply on several places, and also I'm here and there giving lectures about, well, especially today, for example, but also in other places I'm giving lectures about the project itself. But it's difficult to find a space where I can actually exhibit the entire project. But I'm gonna try and look for places that can house my project for longer than one day.
I think you should
Well,
try to do your exhibition in Jakarta. Maybe you should try to Erasmus House.
yeah, you
I don't know if I
sponsor
can move my model, but my model's pretty big.
Oh, oke. Oke. Kenapa Pak Yuda? Bagaimana?
Yeah, I just want to say to Ibu Nynke Stam, there would be a TV broadcast about the interniran by the
Oh.
Dutch TV on August the 17th.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so looking forward for that because the Dutch journalist coming here, they went to the interniran that you mentioned before, Chideng. Chideng, yeah.
Yeah, Chideng.
So
I
they
didn't
interview
know
some
that
people.
they're,
They interview
yeah.
some people, and then, yeah, not everybody knows because it was forbidden by the Japanese at that time. So the Indonesian, not fully aware.
Yeah,
It
right.
was, yeah, that's the situation.
Yeah.
So good luck with, and feel sorry about your grandma. So she was here, right,
Yeah.
in Menteng.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was.
Alright.
Yeah.
Oke, terima kasih banyak Pak Yuda. Terima kasih untuk teman-teman yang sudah merespon dan mendengarkan. Saya rasa sekarang saya mau membacakan summary ya dari apa yang Nynke sampaikan. So I guess this is we almost come to the end of the session.
Yeah.
Let me do the summarizing of what you have been presenting. Jadi ternyata dari Nynke ini ada point of view yang berbeda, bahwa sejarah kalau tidak diceritakan dengan lengkap itu menjadi sangat timpang. Mungkin dari Nynke kita dapat merasakan empatinya Nynke dan bisa merasakan bahwa ada kekagetan tersendiri ketika Nynke mendatangi Indonesia dan kota-kota yang masih menjaga, merawat, dan berusaha memperbaiki justru bangunan dari masa kolonialisme. Dari poin-poin tersebut, bahkan arsitektur vernakular menjadi sangat menarik untuk dielaborasi di kota Rotterdam gitu. Jadi dari kesimpulan diskusi sore ini, saya rasa bahwa sebagai orang Indonesia dengan memiliki heritage yang panjang, bahkan dari sebelum masa kolonial, kita orang Indonesia wajib melestarikan arsitektur vernakular dulu, kemudian arsitektur di masa kolonialisme, dan justru berbagi ilmunya, ilmu tektonikanya dan ilmu struktur kayu, bambu, dan bata dan batunya kepada negara lain, khususnya kepada Belanda. Nynke, one of my point of summarizing is that Indonesian architecture, heritage architecture is actually divided into period before the colonialism and after colonialism. So,
Okay.
yeah, so maybe due to this discussion, I think we need more to collaborate and preserve vernacular Indonesian architecture and do collaboration with your country in terms of technology, tectonica, response to climate, response to earthquake, and so on. So I think we are looking forward to meet you again, maybe in
Yeah.
another bigger project and real project of your studio.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe we could do more group discussion, and maybe there will be, if you are in Indonesia and we are from Architects Association profession, we do a lot of on-site workshops on heritage building, not only vernacular but also in this architecture. So maybe you have the opportunity to join later on in the future.
Yeah,
There's
that
still
would be
time.
amazing. Yeah.
Oke, terima kasih kepada para audience. Thank you very much for Nynke for presenting this afternoon. We
Thank
are
you for
looking
having
forward to,
me.
yes, of course. Terima kasih untuk PDA, terima kasih untuk Universitas Trisakti, terima kasih juga untuk Sekretariat Nasional IAI yang sudah mendukung kegiatan obrolan heritage kali ini. Untuk teman-teman yang mungkin nanti membutuhkan presentasinya akan kami tanyakan karena harus seizin dari Nynke. Baik, saya rasa sore ini sudah selesai. Saya kembalikan kepada Bintan. Saya Anneke Prasyanti pamit. Terima kasih untuk obrolan heritage kali ini.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bu Anneke. Thank you, Nynke. So before we close the event, let me tell you about the information for upcoming Obrolan Heritage 95 edition, and that will be held in August. So the slide. So the information that we will share the information about the next event through our social media. So please make sure you already follow our Instagram in Documentation Arsitektur and our Facebook page in Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur. Also, the PDA has
Bintan nge-freeze. Halo? Selamat sore, Bintan. Halo?
Ambil alih aja, Bu.
Ini Bintannya di mana ya lokasinya? Via mungkin bisa melanjutkan? Ini Bintan muncul lagi. Halo? Bintan. I think Bintan is gone. I don't know where. Oke, mungkin Via bisa melanjutkan jika masih ada pengumuman. Kalau tidak ada, mungkin kita foto bersama dulu. Ini Bintan kayaknya keluar ya, kelempar. Bisa foto bersama dulu. Siapa yang PIC-nya? Apakah dari Sekretariat Nasional?
Ibu
sorry,
Mari.
sorry for the connection. Koneksi kantor
Oke, Bintan
terputus,
hilang.
maaf.
Oke, balik lagi.
Yeah.
Silakan. Tadi sampai
Maybe for
acara OH Agustus
yeah,
akan
oh,
diadakan tanggal
Agustus
berapa?
akan diadakan. Untuk informasinya mungkin nanti bisa memfollow di akun Instagram kami di Dokumentasi Arsitektur dan juga di Facebook page kami di Pusat Dokumentasi Arsitektur Indonesia. Nah, mungkin sebelum kita tutup acaranya, please to audience to open your camera so we can take some documentation.
Baik,
Nah,
para
akan
peserta
dipimpin
silakan membuka kamera.
akan dipimpin oleh Kavia.
Oke, sebentar. Kita ada 3 slide ya. Slide pertama. 1, 2, 3. slide kedua. 1, 2. Ya, slide ketiga. 1, 2, 3. Ya.
Oke, that's all. Baik, terima kasih kepada rekan-rekan yang sudah hadir dan juga thank you very much for the great presentation from Nynke Stam. And terima kasih juga kepada Bu Anneke yang telah memimpin jalannya diskusi dengan sangat luar biasa. Baik, kalau begitu saya tutup acara obrolan Heritage Story ini. Saya Bintan Haya beserta seluruh teman-teman yang bertugas mengucapkan terima kasih dan selamat sore. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih semua. Danke,
Terima
Nike.
kasih.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Terima
much,
kasih.
Thank you so much, everyone.
semuanya.
See you next month.